G'day folks, Mad Aussie here and welcome to the Aussie Report. Back in 2016, the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull announced a royal commission into the treatment of children in juvenile detention in the Northern Territory after revelations of abuse at the Youth Detention facility in Berrima outside Darwin. The Prime Minister said that like all Australians, he was deeply shocked and appalled at the abuse revealed on Four Corners. Vision of the tear gassing of 6 boys being held in isolation at the Youth Detention Centre in Darwin in August 2014 has been obtained by Four Corners, exposing one of the darkest incidents in the history of juvenile justice in Australia. This is part of an investigation featuring a chilling catalogue of footage revealing a pattern of abuse, deprivation and punishment of vulnerable children inside Northern Territory youth detention centres. The tear gassing incident was described as a riot at the time, with media reporting multiple boys had escaped their cells in the isolation wing of their prison, known as the Behavioural Management Unit, and threatened staff with weapons. But CCTV vision and handycam recordings made by staff, obtained exclusively by Four Corners, show only one boy escaped his cell after it was left unlocked by a guard. Former Corrections Commissioner Ken Middlebrook last year defended the officer's actions in the wake of a damning report by the Northern Territory Children's Commissioner. "I am not in the business of overuse of force. There were 2 sprays from an aerosol in the area. Now it wasn't overuse of gas," Mr. Middlebrook told the ABC at the time. But CCTV vision from the incident shows 10 bursts of tear gas being sprayed into the enclosed area over the space of 1.5 minutes. All 6 boys were exposed to the tear gas, 5 while still locked in their cells. The 14-year-old boy who escaped his cell can be heard repeatedly asking how long he had been in isolation and requesting to talk to staff. Instead of negotiating with the boy, prison staff can be heard laughing and mocking him, calling the boy an idiot and a little fucker. Four Corners has managed to track down several of the boys who were tear-gassed. They described being highly distressed, afraid for their lives, and they say 2 years on they are still suffering from disturbing flashbacks and nightmares from the ordeal. The CCTV vision also shows the children's reactions as they were affected by the gas, running to the back of their cells, hiding behind sheets and mattresses, gasping for air, crying and bending over toilets. One boy is left in his cell and exposed to tear gas for 8 minutes. He is seen lying face down on the floor with his hands behind his back before being handcuffed by 2 prison officers wearing gas masks and dragged out of his cell. In the days after the tear gassing, Northern Territory Corrections Minister John Elferink praised the actions of his staff and the prison security dog used on that night of the incident. In the wake of the incident, the Dondale Centre was closed down and the children were moved to the run-down old Berrima adult prison. But the same barbaric practices seemed to follow them over to that facility that kept the name Dondale. So now we move over to January of 2022 with this article. This is an ABC article titled "Indigenous Leaders, Lawyers Call for Promised Closure of Dondale Youth Detention Centre near Darwin." This was posted on the 4th of January 2022. Scrolling down, it says, "A group of Darwin Indigenous community leaders and a prominent local barrister are promising to maintain a weekly protest outside the city's notorious Dondale Youth Detention Centre until it is closed. The Northern Territory's Youth Detention Royal Commission recommended the centre's closure 4 years ago after outrage over children being shackled to chairs and tear-gassed. Larrakia elder June Mills is among the group who say they are not prepared to keep waiting indefinitely for the government to honour its promise to replace the centre with better facilities and programs. "We are not putting up with it anymore," she said. "We've had enough. We're going to be here and we're going to be in your face until we begin to get something that looks like what we want. Not only for our babies, but for all people that are incarcerated. The Gunner government has said it stopped shackling and spit-hooding teenagers in youth detention, but it is still continuing practices which the Royal Commission said should be stopped, including long periods of isolation for inmates. The current Dondale Centre is an old, condemned adult prison which the children were moved to in 2015 after some damage and broke out of the original facility. June Mills challenged any member of the government to try putting one of their children into a Dondale cell for one day. Next is titled Conditions Not Suitable for an Adult Convict. Barrister John Lawrence, SC, said spending 21 hours a day in a Dondale cell was a damaging experience for one of his clients, a traumatised 11-year-old boy. He said the boy was on remand, facing charges including breaching his bail conditions and shoplifting. We all know that's why we're all here, that putting an 11-year-old into Dondale is fundamentally wrong and it's obscene, he said. At the moment, because they've got staff shortages, he's only allowed out of his cell during the day 3 times, 1 hour at a time, and at 6:30 p.m. he's back in until 8:30 in the morning. This barbarism is horrendous. You wouldn't put a convict criminal male in conditions like that. He said his client can't sit still and should be getting intensive mental health services instead of detention. This is a child who is damaged. He's clearly got mental psychological problems caused by living in a household full of trauma, he said. He needs care, he needs professional treatment of the best, and his case doesn't come on until April, so he is facing the prospect if he doesn't get bail again, he will be in there for 4 months. Next is titled Trauma School Proposal Rejected. The Territory Government accepted the Royal Commission's recommendation to close Dondale in 2017. It promised in 2020 that construction on the new 30-bed cottage-style purpose-built centre would be complete this year. But it is planning to build the new centre beside the Holt's prison, which contravenes the Royal Commission's recommendation that Dondale's replacement must not be beside the adult facility. In December, 33 children were in Dondale, down from 43 in November, and 96% of them were Indigenous. One is a relative of Natalie Hunter, a founder of the Northern Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency. The Royal Commission said, "Shut down Dondale," she said. The government needs to get in their heads, and locking up our 10-year-old children in a cage that was not fit for an adult is not acceptable. More teenagers are being detained since the government passed laws in May criminalising breach of bail. And there's a picture of Natalie Hunter. Miss Hunter said she was dismayed that Territory Families Minister Kate Warden had rejected a proposal she submitted for an alternative to detention. "I believe we need a trauma school, a healing place for our children, not Dondale," she said. "The government needs to start listening to the people instead of just worrying about their votes, and I think they've lost it now in how they treat Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory. To me, it's pure racism, and Kate Warden should step down." Miss Hunt also said she had been frustrated by seeing most of the government money intended to reduce youth crime and the numbers of children going into the child protection system going to non-Indigenous NGOs, which she said did not have the contacts needed to make a difference for Aboriginal people. Next is titled Stolen Generations Legacy. Gurindji woman Josie Crawshaw said she had watched inadequately addressed stolen generations trauma contribute to rising crime rates in Darwin, Alice Springs, Tennant Creek and Katherine. She said it had also been the factor in the incarceration of some of her family members. "I've had a nephew in jail twice. I've got my own grandson at the moment that's in a drug and alcohol rehabilitation place because they've all been part of seeing trauma in the house," she said. And that's what a lot of jail population is. Miss Crawshaw was the head of Northern Territory's now defunded SAFT Indigenous Child Protection Agency and said the government should urgently invest in more youth diversion programs and trauma support services. Because we're looking at genocide, because they've had every report at the highest level and they've done nothing, she said. Next is titled New Centre Will Strike a Balance. Miss Warden responded with a statement saying that the new Youth Detention Centre would be finished this year and the government was funding youth diversion programs as well. She said the new facility design would strike a balance between ensuring it is safe and secure while meeting the therapeutic needs of young people. Mr. Lawrence said he expected the government would try to ignore the protests, but said he hoped the Australian public would not allow that. The government is only interested, like so many, in retaining power, and so we have now reached an impasse, he said. And what we're doing now is another limb of democracy, which is direct action taken by people who realise that it's the only prospect of ever achieving any of the change which is required. So moving on to June 2022, the Sydney Criminal Lawyers website have posted an article, and I'm not going to go through all of this one because we're getting long enough as it is. This is titled Northern Territory Government Continues Youth Detention Torture Regime at Dondale. So as of this month in June, Dondale is still open and is still torturing children by all accounts. Starts off here with 6 years after Four Corners exposed atrocities being perpetrated upon children at Darwin's Dondale Youth Detention Centre and the subsequent push for reforms in its wake, the Northern Territory government has successfully re-established the institutional torture of kids. Around the time of the revelations, the nation learnt that kids were being strapped to chairs and hooded, gassed in isolation cells and hogtied by so-called youth justice officers in the former Berrima Adult Maximum Security Prison, which was slated to be torn down in 2014. The torture of detained kids, which extended to Alice Springs Youth Prison, sparked the Royal Commission into the protection and detention of children in the Northern Territory. Its 2017 final report delivered 4 volumes of recommendations, including shutting Dondale and raising the imprisonment age. But the notorious child jail still stands. Last weekend saw 4 detainees taken to hospital due to self-harm. This is in line with a rise in such incidents, which Northern Territory Acting Children's Commissioner Nicole Hucks told Northern Territory News it is due to the continual and systemic use of extended lockdowns. Indeed, the Office of the Children's Commissioner, Northern Territory, recently released data outlining that the number of youths in detention in the Territory has increased by 200% since May 2020, which is clear evidence that last year's tough on crime youth bail reforms are having the desired effect. Next is titled Bail is a Privilege, Not a Right. I won't read all this out, just give you the first paragraph here. Based on an analysis of Northern Territory government custody figures, the Children Commissioner's data reveals that over May this year, 100 youths had passed through the Territory's 2 youth jails, while in May 2020, 31 children did, with a dramatic spike already evident in May 2021 when 67 kids were inside. To worry. Next is titled Stark Systemic Racism. The Northern Territory Labor government passed a 2019 bail reform bill in response to the Royal Commission recommendations, which provided a presumption in favour of bail for youths, except under extreme circumstances, and the removal of the offence of a breach of a bail condition for youths. But in a sign that the settler colonial state of Australia is working like a well-oiled machine, regardless of which major is at the helm, the Conservative opposition ran a scare campaign and produced laws to weaken bail reforms, which then led to the Gunner Ministry to pass its own version of the measures. So they're messing with everything. Youth detention and the Northern Territory overwhelmingly involves locking up Aboriginal kids. On 2nd of May this year, there were 63 children in Territory youth jails, and 61 or 97% of them were First Nations. Scrolling down, next is titled A Nation's Shame. We can imagine what this discusses. This is a real embarrassment for our country to treat children like, this in such a modern day and age that we live in, apparently. And lastly, titled Waiting for It to Blow Over. In 2017, due to the Dondale fallout, the Attorney General George Brandis determined to ratify the OPCAT Treaty, which signalled that our nation would roll out a UN-governed system of independent inspection bodies to guard against human rights abuses in place of detention. However, the federal coalition government failed to roll out the system that would serve to improve the conditions in youth detention centres, in a similar manner to the way that the Royal Commission's recommendation to close Dondale and raise the age have been forgotten. So, as authorities shift back to the gear they were travelling in prior to the calls to stop the torture of minors in youth jails, issues like self-harm are on the rise again, which last weekend saw one 16-year-old boy at Dondale hospitalised twice after trying to take his own life on 2 occasions. Quite sad. So, these articles will be linked below. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.
You could try to play, but you're never gonna beat me. Look the other way, what I'm doing ain't easy. Bloody hands stained from the people who deceive me. Muddy hands break through the chains, go free me.